Hello, everybody. I'm trying this as an experiment in communication, both public and private. There's some things that I would like to draw to Mr. Elon Musk's attention. I interviewed him a while back on my podcast. That was primarily released on X, but also more broadly. We've met a couple of times. I've been watching what he's been doing, like everyone in the world has been. And I'm also interested in his reaction to the situation with Tommy Robinson. I interviewed Tommy last year twice with my wife, and I've been following his travails in the UK diligently. I just spoke with Ezra Levant, who runs Rebel News, this troublemaking, rabble-rousing media organization, alternative media organization in Canada. Ezra and I have interacted with each other for about 10 years. He was an early advocate of mine when all hell broke loose around me at the university, and we've kept in touch ever since. In any case, Ezra Levant also hired Tommy Robinson as a journalist a few years ago and knows him quite well. Brought him to Canada relatively recently, where he was arrested at exactly the time that I was supposed to interview him. So that was another interesting overlap. Anyways, when I talked to Ezra Levant, we discussed Tommy, and he's in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison in the UK. And he's not allowed any visitors who have a social media following, whatever that means, given that virtually everybody has at least some social media following now. And this essentially means that he'll spend 9 months in solitary for what's a civil offense. And it's been 4, and that's a long time. And his guest slots aren't filled, partly because of these restrictions. I asked Ezra, too, if Tommy was in solitary at his own request, because the prison is a dangerous place, because it's a maximum security prison, and it's full of the sort of people who might not approve of Tommy Robinson, let's put it that way. And Ezra told me that Tommy hadn't requested to be isolated in this manner, that he was willing to take his chances in the general population. So that's what I know about that. In any case, he's got 5 more months in solitary, 22 hours a day. When I interviewed him, he'd expressed some real concerns about his ability to maintain his psychological integrity under such conditions. You know, we use solitary confinement as a punishment sufficiently brutal to deter even psychopaths who are about as non-social as you can possibly imagine. And so depriving people of social contact is, I think it's cruel and unusual punishment, and is something that perhaps should never be used, but if it's used, should be used, let's say, very judiciously. And I think that he's being subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. And if that produces fatal consequences, which is a possibility, that doesn't bode well for the general stability of the UK, you might say. And it's not a risk that should be taken. And so I want to draw everyone's attention to the plight of Tommy Robinson, regardless of what you think of him and what he's done, say, as a whistleblower on the gang side. His punishment is exceptionally heavy-handed, and it isn't at all obvious to me that it's wise. It's also not obvious to me that he'll make it through 9 months of this intact. And Ezra was concerned for the same reasons. So that's that. So there's a second issue that I'd like to draw your attention to, Mr. Musk, but also public attention to. I've been watching your line-by-line analysis of budgetary expenditures at the federal level. And I know, or I think I know, that part of this process, part of the reason you're engaged in this, is because you're not happy, you might say, with what Gad Saad has described as the woke mind virus. And you've retweeted Gad a fair bit, and I know you're familiar with his work. Now, I also know, or think I know, that part of the reason that you're unhappy is because of what happened with your son, which you discussed on my podcast and made public. And I noticed during that conversation that to say you were unhappy about what had happened and the advice you got about suicide risk, for example, on the part of children with gender dysphoria was false, despicably false and dangerous, and that you not only haven't recovered from that, but have taken it with all due seriousness. And so it seems to me that your efforts on behalf of investigating the funding that is being shuttled to various agencies and organizations around the world who push the woke progressive agenda are admirable and useful, and hopefully they will be salutary. But I think there's something very important that you're missing, maybe crucially important. You may know or may not, something I discovered partly from talking to the Republican Governors Treasuries Association, but also from going to the Republican governors' meetings and talking to a variety of Republican governors. 50% of the state budgets in the U.S. are devoted to K through 12 education. All the teachers in the K through 12 education system are products of the faculties of education, which I think are among the most, if not the most, ideologically corrupt and incompetent of all the university disciplines. They're major contributors to the dominance of woke culture in the U.S., particularly in the U.S., but also across the West. They attract low-quality students, by and large, and they do terrible research. One example of that, for example, was that the faculties of education, it was faculties of education who came up with the idea of whole word learning, which was a complete bloody catastrophe, foregoing the utility of the phonetic alphabet, which is one of the major inventions of humankind, replacing that with the proposition that you should teach children how to read the same way expert readers read, which was a preposterous theory to begin with and which had devastating consequences. And the faculties of education pushed multiple intelligence theory, which is a complete crock of nonsense. They pushed self-esteem training, which can't be done and produces narcissists. They cloak their left-wing ideological propagandizing in social, economic, social, emotional learning strategies, etc., etc. The faculties of education are an unmitigated disaster. They produce the teachers who have a hammerlock on 50% of the state budgets. They're spending $25,000 a year, thereabouts, per student, when private organizations are capable of providing a higher quality education at 1/10 that cost. The Republicans, conservatives in general, and classic liberals have been completely asleep at the wheel for 60 years as the faculties of education have distributed the demoralizing progressive agenda to the children of everyone, liberal, conservative, and progressive alike, through the K through 12 system. And they control 50% of the state budgets. There's not a chance that the progressive agenda is going to be undermined and replaced as long as the faculties of education have a hammerlock on half the state budgets and all the education of all children. So what's the best move? Well, there may be little you can do federally. I don't know the policy details well enough to opine in that regard, but in my opinion, the faculties of education should be stripped of their monopoly on teacher certification. There's no evidence whatsoever that they've produced that the teachers that they purport to educate have been educated in a manner that makes them effective teachers, either because of the way they were selected as students or the way that they're trained and educated as teachers. And so there's no defeating the woke mind virus without breaking the hammerlock of the faculties of education on teacher certification. And so, anyways, those are two issues that I've been considering since we had our discussion. And I know that you're as busy as any human being can possibly be, but I know that these two issues are close to your heart, and I thought I'd throw my 2 cents in for what it's worth. And while doing, inform everybody else about my thoughts on the matter and the way forward that I think might be most appropriate. Thanks very much for your time and attention.
I've come out to Wood Hill Prison to see Tommy Robinson today. I was told that I could visit him at 2:30 this afternoon, but the prison authorities have decided that they're not ready for me to go inside. I've been following him for 3 years as he follows the gang rapists because I was concerned for the British young women who were being raped. And more recently, as a journalist, he covered a school playground scuffle that had become an international scandal. After that, he made a documentary trying to understand what happened in that scenario. That school is now closed, and everyone has departed from their jobs. There was so much corruption and payoff and secrecy that this documentary was not supposed to be shown. But Tommy Robinson felt compelled to show it to tell the truth. Now he has been charged with contempt of court, and he made himself available to the courts to charge him and to put him in jail. They have him held in solitary confinement here. He's hesitant to eat from the cafeteria because there's a large Muslim population here, and he feels that he may be poisoned. And now he's getting very thin. Some Danish journalists came here and visited him and saw that he's lost a lot of weight. So he's only eating canned tuna, which he can't survive on for months. There's not enough fat in that food to nourish his brain and his heart. And so I suggest to people, if they come in, they can bring him something like pepperoni sticks or a kind of carnivore snack that is packaged, that has proper animal fat to nourish and sustain him. It's going to be on our conscience if he dies in there. It should be on our conscience now. He's in here for 9 months. He's been in here for 4 months so far for a simple civic charge, and they've put him in maximum security. It's not right.